Hello, everyone, and happy Atlas Shrugged Day here on September 2nd, 2025. Why September 2nd, you ask? Well, not only is it the first date that is featured in Ayn Rand's magnum opus, Atlas Shrugged, but it is also the first date that's listed on Ayn Rand's first draft of the novel that she started writing in 1946. Started drafting in 1946, I should say. So today, to celebrate that incredible day, we have this awesome panel here. My name is Brandon Lisi. I'm an associate archivist here at the Ayn Rand Institute, and I'm joined by my colleague, Audra Hilse, a fellow archivist here, and of course, Shoshana Milgram, our Ayn Rand expert and literature professor. And today, we're celebrating this day by bringing you something very rare and very special. So just to kick us off, why don't I turn to you, Audra, first. Tell us a little bit about what we are premiering today.
So what we are premiering is new and improved quality audio and a little bit more audio for one of Ayn Rand's Fort Hall Forum talks, which she titled, "Is Atlas Shrugging?" as a question. And she gave this talk in the spring of 1964 at the Fort Hall Forum in Boston. This was, I believe, her fourth Fort Hall Forum talk out of 19. Early in her time speaking at the forum. And we've had this talk, ARI has had this talk up on our YouTube channel along with all of Ayn Rand's other Fort Hall Forum talks, but thanks in large part to your efforts, Brandon, we did recently acquire both much better quality audio version of this talk, and also our current audio was missing a little bit actually at the very beginning of the talk. So our new audio is not only better quality, but it captures that that very first part of her talk that unfortunately was missing from the version that we had access to previously.
Excellent. Well, just to give our audience a little bit of context, why don't I now turn to you, Shoshana, and you can tell us a little bit about how this talk that she gives in the spring of 1964, as Audra mentioned, fits into the publication of Atlas Shrugged, which had occurred 7 years earlier.
Okay. Well, as you say, Atlas Shrugged, the novel, was published in October 1957, and it was... people have been waiting for it because The Fountainhead had been bestseller, and this one became a bestseller too. The New York Times said so, Publishers Weekly said so, and it was selling very well. And Ayn Rand was in quite a bit of demand as a lecturer in public spaces, including universities. And what happened is that Atlas Shrugged was her calling card, and she featured it. She quoted from it. She quoted from it when she spoke at Yale. That's where she did Faith and Force, and that was published in Vital Speeches. And she did it in The Objectivist Ethics, a famous article that she gave at the University of Wisconsin. But she didn't actually put Atlas Shrugged in the title. She used Atlas Shrugged. So I think that makes it interesting. Well, there are many things about it that are interesting, but this was a time when she actually was speaking, assuming that people might either have heard of Atlas Shrugged or know what Atlas Shrugged was, and that would be a source of interest. Also, I think another feature of interest here is that, as you'll hear in the talk, it was both, in some ways, it was a nonfiction connection to Atlas Shrugged, because while she was working on Atlas Shrugged, as she'll tell you, she had a file of documentation and research, which she called the horror file, and she drew on that in her mind, not that she was going to copy the things that she knew, but that these were parallels in the world. So she had this, but she had not made it public. So in Atlas Shrugging, this speech, she both makes the connection to her novel and to this file of material. Now, should I tell you what happened afterwards to the file?
Please, yeah.
Okay. Well, what happened is that after she gave this speech, readers and listeners started sending her more material so that she had a lot more ingredients for the horror file. Now, she had thought of publishing some of these in her first periodical, the first periodical she co-edited, which was the Objectivist newsletter. And she, in fact, was going to have a section in there, we get this from the notes, that was going to call it, "So You Think I Exaggerate." Well, as it happened, there was plenty of material in the Objectivist newsletter without so you think I exaggerate. But I think you can even hear in this talk that she says, so you thought I exaggerate. But when she ended up publishing it, and it was in The Objectivist years later, the bigger expanded version, readers would send her more material, and that became a feature. It appeared 29 times in the publication, and there were, I don't know, 130 some elements, little bits. So you could say that Is Atlas Shrugging was both part of the planning process of Atlas Shrugged and also part of the sequel of Atlas Shrugged. And then after people heard this speech, they sent her more elements. And I guess you could say that it's both good news and bad news that there were elements, because it meant that some of the negative aspects of the culture she'd identified were true. And it also meant that she had readers who could identify the parallels, and also that some of the ideas she had written about had appeared manifestly in action.
Wow. Well, yeah, the thing that really strikes me about this talk is that for Rand, the ideas that she presents in her novel are not floating abstractions, but real concretes in the world that have some bearing on the world that we actually live in. So maybe, Audra, given that, you are one of the people who works really closely with these materials, maybe you could tell us just a little bit about how Ayn Rand's approach to analyzing current events, and Shoshana, please do add anything else as well. But let's turn to Audra first. Please tell us a little bit about Rand's process for preparing for talks like these. Take it away.
Yeah, so we have, fortunately, a lot of material in the Ayn Rand archives, in Ayn Rand's papers, that gives us a look into sort of the behind the scenes of not only her novels, actually, but also then her later nonfiction, speaking and writing, like this talk and many of her other talks. And so what we have, and there is some of her material is at the Library of Congress. So I should say that, for example, the holograph manuscript, the handwritten manuscript for this talk, is at the Library of Congress and not with us. But what we have in the Ayn Rand archives is the clippings. So the reference material, she's part of what she's doing in this talk, as you noticed, she's analyzing current events. She's quoting articles, she's quoting, other sources which are relating incidents which are very similar to fictional incidents that she has occur in Atlas Shrugged, and then asking that question about what is going on, in the world today. And some of these are quite recent to her talk. We do have early 1964, clippings that she is then referencing in this spring 1964 lecture at the Fort Hall Forum. So she's very up to date on this. She did read the newspaper very regularly. And so that's a lot of what we have on the back end of this is not, and it's for some of her talks, the Ayn Rand Archives has the drafts. In some cases, they're at the Library of Congress, but they're preserved in either case. But what we have uniquely, I think, at the Ayn Rand Archives is this background material. And so these are all, they're in a few different folders. They're called different things. Several of the clippings she references in this particular talk, she has in a folder which she titled, in this, standard manila file folder, but in her handwriting, she's written on it special horror file, and like special is underlined twice. So so she's keeping track of that. And there are many other folders that are labeled horror file, in part because, as Shoshana says, after she gives this talk and starts to sort of make her interest in this sort of material known publicly, fans of hers or people who are interested in her ideas do start to send her more of this type of material, and she keeps a lot of it. And not just the clippings that they're sending her necessarily, but also the correspondence often that they send with it. They often send the clipping with a letter or a note, and she kept all of that too. So those are often together. But I believe at least one of the clippings she references in this talk, she has in a folder titled Welfare Statism. And there's a couple of other folders as well with maybe slightly less interesting titles. Sometimes they're just, it's clippings with dates or, was the folder title or things like that. But she kept all of this stuff, and many of them have markings on them. I didn't check every single one, but the ones that I did check, it's like very frequently she has, made some marking at the side on the exact paragraphs that she's quoting in this particular talk, or marked on the original clipping that she kept, and that sort of thing. So she was able, using the principles of objectivism that she understood very clearly in her mind, and that she had certainly laid out much of in Atlas Shrugged. She's reading the newspaper daily, or most days, I imagine, and she's looking for these concretes. And she just had that very clear understanding of how the concretes relate back to the abstract ideas that she had presented as her philosophy. And so she can read an article and immediately just see, oh, this is an example of whatever, thing it might be. And both for good and ill, because she did keep clippings that were, more positive, examples as well. But this talk particularly, we're focusing on the horror file clippings because that was her focus in this talk. But so that's kind of the background material that we have, and we have that sense about her process in writing a talk like this one in particular, where, and this is true actually of many of her Ford Hall Forum talks, she's often referencing something that's current in the world. And so it was a similar process, I think, for other of her talks as well, and just that she is paying attention to what is going on in the world. She's reading the newspapers, she's listening to radio programs, maybe, watching TV, and just seeing what is happening, and then connecting it to her ideas, and analyzing these concretes in the context of her philosophy.
Yeah, I wanted to add something because I in case everybody doesn't know, she majored in history. That was her subject at university. And I think that this interest in the clippings ties in with that, because this is history right now. Okay, this is history as it's being written right now. And so, of course, she said she was a philosopher, novelist, both and together. So being a philosopher, her ideas and history, the facts and the novels, all these went together. But here you can actually see, is Atlas Shrugging as the title for a whole and as a question. And maybe we'll say something later about why it is a question. She does leave the future open, because people do have free will. But it's really very exciting because, as you say, she's reading the newspaper and she sees things. A lot of the clippings, I think, that from the New York Times, those she found herself because she was reading it. The clippings that came from other places might more likely have been sent to her by people, and we've got the envelopes, and sometimes they wrote to her. You'll hear in the talk she mentions that someone made a little annotation on one of the clippings. But the New York Times, she had that thoroughly herself. But the others, the ones that she chose, she could see the relevance. And I think it's interesting what you said, Audra, about the negative, because the negative and the positive kind of go together. Okay, because she gives you two quotations within this talk, and one of them has to do with the atlases and the people who sustain and support the world until they don't. Okay, and what that is about, and some of the passages, the clippings that she has pertain to that, and the other quotation she has to do with what happens when they don't to everything else, to the rest of the world, and that's covered too. So it's the positive and the negative in her novel, and in the clippings go together. And it's so exciting, actually. I mean, it's wonderful that the archives she's a saver, that she saved all these things, because it's almost as if you're reading with her, even though the clippings, 60 years ago, but you can find your own clippings, and apply the process there. But there's even, this speech is very exciting to listen to because it's mostly scripted, but there are a couple of ad libs in it which you won't have seen if you've seen the published version, right? And that pertain to the fact that this is real. And when you look at the clipping, you can see that it is. And, well, I'll just say that I actually looked up a fair number of these myself, just to see what the rest of the context was. especially New York Times, is easy. We've got a full archive. The New York Times puts up all that information, and she quoted accurately.
Yeah, well, I think our audience is eager to hear the full talk now that you've set it up so well. But just to give our audience just a little bit more context about how this fits into Rand's broader career, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention just Rand's history at the Ford Hall Forum. I believe one of you mentioned that she spoke at the Ford Hall a total of 19 times between 1961 and 1981. So maybe we could start with you, Audra. Just tell us a little bit, just give us a brief indication of how this talk series fit into her career. And again, Shoshana, if you have more to add, which I'm sure you will, please do.
Yeah. And there are other sources from ARI about this as well. Our retired colleague Tom Bowden wrote a really great article about Ayn Rand's, time at speaking at the Ford Hall Forum. So I encourage you to look that up. But just to condense that for the moment, she was, after the publication of Atlas Shrugged, she was looking for active minds, people with active minds, not necessarily people who agreed with her, but people who were interested in ideas and who were willing to think about ideas. And we see that she takes up a lot of public speaking. I mean, as Shoshana, as you noted, she's in demand after the publication of Atlas Shrugged as a speaker. There's hundreds, almost well over 200, invitations that we have in her papers that she received from various people and organizations to come speak to them, most of which are in this post-Atlas period. There's a few from earlier in her career. And she doesn't accept anywhere near that many of them. She does accept quite a few. And she accepts the most in that, period of years right after Atlas Shrugged is published, I would say kind of 1959 to 1964. And then after 1964, we do see a pretty steep drop off in the number of speaking invitations that she's accepting. She does still accept them, but a lot fewer than she was. And she had spoken many different universities. Usually it's a student group inviting her, but not always. Sometimes it's, a professor, lots of different, sources for this, other types of organizations. But the one thing that stays the same, even after that sort of overall drop off of her accepting invitations, is that year after year, the Ford Hall Forum invites her back, and year after year, Ayn Rand goes to speak at the Ford Hall Forum. And that's because the Ford Hall Forum really was that audience of active minds that she was looking for, and just an overall respect for ideas at the Ford Hall Forum in all ways. And she really appreciated that atmosphere. She says in an early letter to them, she appreciated I believe her phrasing was, the remarkably intellectual atmosphere of the forum. And that remained the case over, as you noted, Brandon, a 20-year period. And so that's why, even though she stops accepting a lot of speaking invitations at a certain point in the mid-60s, she always accepts the invitation from the forum. And not just the forum, there are a few other places, of course, that she speaks during those later years as well. But the forum, very consistently, it was definitely, I think, the place she spoke the most number of times in her career.
So in the public, for the public.
In public, yes, of course. She had, her own more private, settings, lecture series and things. But yes, in terms of public speaking, the forum is certainly the most.
And the thing is, she said lovely things about it. She said that it takes ideas seriously, it presents speakers of every viewpoint, treats them with scrupulous objectivity, and attracts audiences who have active minds. And she said something interesting. She said the forum represents the best of 19th century liberalism because they're committed to upholding the freedom of the mind. And that was, part of their charter. They were founded in 1908, so they've been going quite a long time. And I'm just going to read a little bit from their charter because I think it's lovely. The forum avoids partisanship, eliminates sectarianism, and disowns class distinction. It's not a deliberative assembly. It's not a debate, not a concert, nor an entertainment, though it has in turn all the allurement, intensity, contention, delight, and excitement that characterize these widely varied occasions. And it always sort of tickled me that it's often been in a place where music is performed, even though nobody's actually singing, but it's as if that, part of the way things are being said, and that the audience is there to listen. And were you going to say something about the judge?
Please take it away, Shoshana.
Now, well, her favorite moderator was Judge Reuben Lurie, who she said he's a man of unusual intellectual distinction and the best moderator she has ever had. Yeah, so, and of course, she was good news for the forum because she was a major source of audience attendance. And they really had to plan ahead when Ayn Rand was speaking. They had to have an overflow location to fit in all the people who couldn't fit in the main place. And they even had to tell the members, this was in the Ford Hall papers, they had to tell their members, no, you can't just bring along a guest with you. We need to, we need to know exactly who is coming. And also, even you might not be able to get in unless you show up early. So there were a lot of interesting speakers over the years. Margaret Mead spoke there, Linus Pauling spoke there, Martin Luther King, but she had the biggest crowds reliably. And they had an event for her after she'd been there 16 times, beautiful, in honoring Ayn Rand. The forum honors itself. I mean, I think that obviously that's true, that it's an award that's an award to them, but that's, I think, why she was willing to keep coming back and was well treated there and found it interesting. As they said, some come to our allies, some are opponents, but everybody comes to listen and to think. And well, that was what she wanted.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think that that's just a beautiful testament to the importance that the Ford Hall Forum Lecture Series had in Ayn Rand's career. And I'm very pleased to say that because of the work that's going on here in the archives, myself, my colleague, Audra Hilse, and, just the whole organization, we have found a really large cache of these recordings, better than the ones that we had previously known about, at the Boston Public Library. So first of all, big thank you to the Boston Public Library for making this audio available to us and for giving us the permission to make it available to this audience today. And we're not done. Part of our mission here in the archives is to go out into the world, find all these recordings of Ayn Rand, not just the talks, but the Q&As, which is something that we are actually still looking for this talk. And so, in other words, the work is not done. I'll note that if you're really excited about hearing this kind of audio before anybody else, hope you will consider becoming an Ayn Rand Institute donor or a member to our programs. I'll note that back in May, we actually previewed a very small clip of this audio for our audience first. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, become a donor today. And it's the kind of thing where you will get access to this material before anybody else. And I'll just note, lastly, that if this excites you, if the kind of material you're about to hear today, if you want to hear more of it, please do consider supporting the Ayn Rand Archives and the Ayn Rand Institute more broadly. It's our absolute privilege to bring as much of this as possible to the world and to help promote it. So everybody, thank you so much for joining our webinar today. And I am very pleased to thank our guests. Audra, Shoshana, thank you so much for being here today, providing such fascinating historical context. And everybody, please enjoy Is Atlas Shrugging?